Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Leisha. I'm an attending doctor in internal medicine here in California, and this video is for the med students out there who are getting ready for your first clinical rotations sometime this summer, or for those of you who are early in med school or who are pre-med, but you are ready to hear about what clinical rotations are really like. So in this video, I will be sharing the 2 reasons why the clinical rotations are different from the preclinical time or from being pre-med, and my top 5 tips for how to really stand out as a medical student, be the best version of yourself, be the kind of medical student that attendings will say is amongst the top 20% or even top 10% of all students that they've worked with. It's a lot like navigating a foreign country in a way, where you're learning new acronyms and new lingo, and you are having to figure out the new role for yourself in this new environment. All at the same time, you're like also trying to figure out basic things like, where is the bathroom? Let's get started. So the number 1 difference between your preclinical and your clinical time are the patients are there, right? So during your clinical time, hopefully, ideally, the focus of that time was really on you understanding the material, making sure you can get your questions answered. Whereas during your clinical rotations, your residents and your attendings will be balancing their clinical obligations with teaching you. So they'll be admitting, discharging, making sure things are done, and responding immediately to kind of unpredictable, sometimes even emergent situations that come up with your patients. And so all of these things mean that you're not always the number 1 priority. And so the students who tend to be the most successful in their rotations understand what the goals and priorities of the team are and how they fit within that. The second difference between your preclinical and clinical time is that during your preclinical time, you are focusing on basic sciences, pathophysiology, and taking a lot of exams. Whereas during your clinical rotations, you'll be focusing more on the diagnosis and management of diseases and on building your clinical skills, plus on finding your role within the dynamic of a team and working to be part of a interdisciplinary team that also includes nurses and physical therapists and ancillary staff. So, there are dynamics going on that have nothing to do with you or with how you're doing, that just being aware of those dynamics can be really helpful. Earlier in the year, like in July, August, September even, your interns and the R2s, they're also ramping up on their skills because they're learning new expectations for themselves. So next we'll talk about my 5 tips for how to navigate all of these changes and be your best self. So my first tip is own your patients. So for me, owning your patients is like a philosophical mindset where you translate how much you care about your patient into concrete actions that you take that show that you care about your patients. And so, I always try to think of my patients as like, if I was this person's family member, I would be doing my best to read up about their condition if it's one I'm not familiar with, and thinking about what more can I do for them to really get them the best health. Is there something I'm missing if I don't understand their diagnosis, right? So one example of how to do this is I had this med student who really impressed me. He was taking care of a patient with a bad cellulitis from a super gnarly dog bite. And the patient was already on appropriate IV antibiotics for her sepsis from this dog bite. But he suggested that we also start rabies prophylaxis because that was something that actually hadn't been started for this patient when she was admitted overnight. So that really impressed me because it showed me that he was thinking beyond what the night team had already mentioned in their notes, and thinking of additional ways to really help protect and take care of this patient. Other ways to show that you really own your patient, you're owning every aspect of care for them, is to just know them really, really well, know the names of their family members, their home medications, be the one talking to their family members and keeping them updated on what's going on with the patient, and be the one looking over their orders and making sure that, if there's something that you guys talked about starting in rounds, that it's appropriately been ordered in Epic. All of these different ways that show that you are keeping track of this patient because you care about their outcome. So my second tip is to prepare in advance when you can. So that involves talking to your upperclassmen and getting the inside scoop for your institution on like which attendings have which preferences, or is there a certain attending that like always asks like certain questions that you should review before you work with them or something like that. And also to try to review the study resources for each rotation. There's a lot of info out there for like each clerkship, which books are the best review books, for example, and actually reading that before the rotation even starts can be really helpful so that you're coming into the rotation with a lot of good foundational knowledge so that your residents and attendings feel like they can help you build upon that foundation with a lot of real world information. Another way of preparing is, to really shine during your presentations. And I'll do a future video on exactly how to really excel at giving presentations, especially internal medicine presentations, which I think can be like a lot longer than ones in like surgery, for example. But I recommend practicing your presentation out loud, writing down exactly what you're going to say and then saying it out loud to yourself at least once in a natural way. So my third tip is to teach your team. You may feel like, wow, my residents are so smart, I don't have anything to really teach them. A lot of the times on rounds though, clinical questions will come up. For example, you might have a patient that one of your interns is following who has a pulmonary embolism, who's getting ready for discharge, and the team is wondering, can we discharge this patient with a direct oral anticoagulant or a DOAC if their BMI is 45, for example? And so those are opportunities for you to say, hey, that's a wonderful question. I'm gonna look that up because I love to learn from this. And then I will share back with the team this afternoon what I've found. And when you offer to help like that, it shows how much you're paying attention. And then you can come back to the team with a very quick, like 1 to 3 minute summary of your findings and your recommendation for what to do for this patient. My fourth tip is help out the team by being really proactive. So a lot of students, I certainly felt like when I was a student, like maybe I don't know how much I have to offer, but there's actually so much that you can do. So, one thing that you do is just knowing your patients really well so that you can be that source of continuity. Sometimes your residents, your attendings may actually all switch to different teams, and you might be the only person who still knows the patient really well because med student rotations tend to be like way longer. So, just by knowing the patient super well, or by being willing to go back and ask patients questions that come up during rounds, or for patients that may have like a changing exam, just checking in on them often. I had a patient on my team with partial status epilepticus, and we're really worried that they were going to develop generalized status epilepticus. And so my med student, took the initiative on his own to basically keep an eye on her like every hour almost, and let us know, thankfully, if anything were to change. It didn't. So a lot of students will ask their resident, hey, is there anything I can do to help? It's kind of like when you go over to your friend's house for dinner and you ask their mom if you can help out in the kitchen, and they'll usually be like, no, you're a guest, like I want you to relax, there's nothing for you to do. And so if you really, really want to help out the team, sometimes it can help if you specifically ask to do something that you noted during rounds. So for example, you could say, I heard during rounds that you guys are going to do this lumbar puncture and you're worried that this patient is going to move around a lot. So I was wondering if I could help come and reassure the patient and help position them with the team. So things like that show that you're really listening and that you're helping out the team very proactively. And there's nothing that's like too big or too small to do. I had an MS3 recently on my team who every time we left the room, he was so consistent about this, about like making sure the patient was like, tucked in, like covered up to the amount they wanted to be, that the lights were on and off, the door was left open or closed a little bit, like whatever the patient preferred. And that really showed the way that he helped the team out with making sure the patient was comfortable. My fifth tip, and definitely one of my more important tips is to know your limits and know when to ask for help. So we're really trying to change the culture of medicine. It's not always been super acceptable in medicine to be really open about when you make a mistake and to acknowledge your imperfections as a doctor. And I'm here telling you that it is okay if, sometimes you examine a patient and you forgot to check the JP drain, or there was something important that you forgot to ask them. There's always chances to go back and ask them again, call them later and ask them, and no one is perfect. I think our system doesn't do the best job always of, making it feel like it's okay for doctors to not be perfect. So this might sound a bit cheesy, but I think it needs to be said. So, you deserve your spot. You've worked really hard to get to where you are, and it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect every day of your rotation in order to be considered an excellent student. I can remember an excellent student I worked with, I wrote a letter of recommendation for, who was just so honest about which things she knew, which things she didn't know, that to me demonstrated great maturity, and I offered to write her a strong letter. So that's it. You've made it to the end of my video, and you now know the 5 tips for how to stand out during your rotations. And I really hope that this was helpful. Please hit the like button or subscribe if this was helpful to you. Feel free to send me a message or put in the comments below if you have any questions about med school or residency that I'd love to help answer for you. So thank you very much.